Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from Jakarta and welcome to the second FPCI GRIPS Virtual Public Forum. My name is Stephanie and I'll be the MC for today's forum. Ladies and gentlemen, Foreign Policy Committee of Indonesia is pleased to collaborate with National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies or GRIPS to convene our joint discussion series. Under this collaboration, FPCI and GRIPS will convene monthly public forum discussing the most pressing international issues, foreign policy, and world affairs. Today, our forum brings the theme of Asian Century, Projection, Expectation, Reality. To start our forum, let us welcome Dr. Dino Patijalal, founder and chairman of Foreign Policy Committee of Indonesia, to deliver his welcoming remarks. Dr. Dino, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Steffi, and I want to say hello from Jakarta to all our friends. I'll begin with Pak Yutaka Imura-san, a good and long-time friend of mine and a martial arts expert. Also, I would remember you with your Aikido stick, right? And also say hello to Dr. Tatsushi Sonobe, Dean and CEO of ADBI. Also saying hello to my good friend Tom Lembong, former Minister of Trade of Indonesia, and Professor Fukunari Kimura, and also Jayan Menon, who is a regular at FPCI events, right? Today we're going to discuss Asian Century. I just want to wish everybody have a good discussions, and it's going to be a very interesting discussion because, you know, I'm Asian, my kids are Asian, but I think what it means to be Asian in the 21st century is very different than what it meant to be an Asian in the 20th century or before that, right? And, you know, there is really a lot of questions that remain to be answered. I know everybody thinks that Asian century seems like a certainty, but I don't think it's something that is preordained, right? I think there's a lot of questions that need to be answered. And I do view Asian century in terms of probably 21st century will be the best century for Asians relative to Asia's centuries before, right? But I don't think it necessarily means the world belongs to Asia in the 21st century. I still think that the 21st century, apart from becoming the Asian century, will also be the American century. The Africans say the 21st century will be the African century, and I think they have a good, reason for saying that. And the Latin Americans are saying that 21st century is a Latin American century, and they also have reason for saying that. Even Europe says, hey, don't count us out, you know, we don't belong to the past, you know, we still belong to the world of the future. So I think what is unique about the 21st century is that it can be everybody's century. I think the century where everybody will reach their best progress to date so far. I think for Indonesia, that will be true. You know, in the 21st century, Indonesia will be 100 years old in 2045, and we expect that to be the best version of Indonesia ever compared to any previous era that we've had in the past. And I think that's going to be true for the rest of Asia as well. But let us not fool ourselves. There's a lot of problems that we face. There's a lot of divisions. There's a lot of gaps. The architecture remains, not solid. Yeah, I'm talking about the political and security and economic architecture, and so on and so on. So all this we're going to discuss in the next hour or so. I just want to wish everybody thank you for being here. Thank you to GRIPS for being a partner of FPCI, and I wish you all the best. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dino. Now I would like to invite His Excellency Ambassador Yutaka Imura, former Ambassador of Japan to Indonesia and Senior Fellow, Visiting Professor at GRIPS Alliance. Ambassador, please, the floor is yours.
Let me try to find.
Sorry, Ambassador, it seems like you're still on mute. Can you please unmute yourself?
I'm sorry, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm very sorry. So shall I start from the beginning?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Stephanie. It is a great pleasure for me to join you today for the second public forum of FPCI and GRIPS. I'm also honored to work with my old friend and FPCI chairman, Dino-san, Dr. Dino Patijaral, to organize and conduct various events aimed at promoting mutual understanding in the international community. Incidentally, I worked with Dino-san to strengthen Japan-Indonesia friendship in early 2000s, when he was an assistant President Yudhoyono, and I was a Japanese ambassador to Indonesia. Almost 20 years have already passed since then. I'm delighted that our long friendship has led to the joint project. At that time, ASEAN countries were in the process of difficult efforts to overcome the effects of the 97-98 Asian economic crisis and to get back on the track of economic growth. Indonesia, in particular, had undergone political upheavals as a result of the economic crisis and had ended its previous era of development dictatorship, so-called development dictatorship, and had begun to embark on a path of democratization. Also, when I was ambassador, there were frequent terrorist attacks by Islamic extremists in Indonesia and a major earthquake and tsunami in Aceh. Japan, as a friend of Indonesia, provided massive economic assistance as a friend of Indonesia. And later, when the 2011 Tohoku massive economic Tohoku earthquake struck northern Japan, and our Indonesian friends sorry, I'm trying to find our Indonesian friends provided assistance to the affected areas in return. This is a kind of friendship that binds Japan and Indonesia, as well as with the countries of Southeast Asia. Actually, in 1972, just after the Vietnam War, the Prime Minister Fukuda announced the basic line of Japan's foreign policy toward ASEAN in a speech in Manila, in which he stated that Japan and sorry, I missed. Japan and ASEAN were equal partners, and Japan would contribute to the peace and the prosperity in the ASEAN region, and that it would build a relationship of trust with ASEAN countries through heart-to-heart contacts. The earthquakes, tsunamis were great tragedies for both of us, but also an opportunity for us to feel the friendships that binds our countries together. The theme of today's forum is the Asian century, and as we enter the 21st century, Asia has become the engine of the global economy, but we are confronted with so many challenges to overcome to ensure that Asia must Asia remains a major economic driving force in the world. The panel of distinguished economists will discuss such topics as what problems Asia must overcome to consolidate its economic power, both in name and in reality, and how the COVID-19 pandemic affected Asian economies, and what the post-pandemic Asian economy will look like. Before we get into these economic issues, I would like to make a few very brief personal remarks on the geopolitical challenges facing Asian countries. This is because without geopolitical stability, economic development cannot be materialized. There are 2 points. One is the need to restore a strategic equilibrium in the region. With the rise of China, the military balance of the region is being eroded, threatening international order and freedom of navigation. The region is also sliding into an arms race. We must not close our eyes to the issue of strategic balance. We must also recognize that the maintenance of equilibrium requires not only military power but also a system of crisis management and mechanism for international coordination and cooperation. In the past, even during the Cold War, a process of arms control and disarmament was established between the United States and the Soviet Union. We need to see the same kind of effort in Asia. Secondly, for the stability of the region, it is essential that the ASEAN region located at a juncture between the Indian and the Pacific Oceans continue to exist as a peaceful, cohesive, and neutral entity that maintains strategic autonomy. The region should not become an arena for power struggles between outside powers. In this sense, ASEAN's proposal of the AOIP, ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific, to promote the cooperation in this region should be highly appreciated. Japan supports the AOIP and is willing to work with ASEAN countries to ensure that this initiative is taken forward. Thank you very much. I wish you all the greatest discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Imura, for your message. We will begin our discussion shortly, but before that, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Tatsushi Sonobe as our moderator for today's discussion. Dr. Sonobe is Dean and Chief Executive Officer of the Asian Development Bank Institute and former Vice President of National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies. Now, without further ado, I would like to pass over the floor to Dr. Sonobe to moderate the discussion. Dr. Sonobe, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good afternoon from Tokyo. Warm welcome to this virtual public forum. I'm Tetsushi Sonobe. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to moderate the discussion among the distinguished panelists. So we have here 3 gentlemen. The first is former Minister Tom Torikashi Lembong, now the chairman of Indonesian Investment Coordinating Board and previously Indonesian Minister of Trade. And the second panelist is Professor Fukunari Kimura, Chief Economist of the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia area, and the Professor Faculty of Economics, Keio University. And third panelist is Dr. Jayant Menon, visiting Senior Fellow, IC's Yusuf Ishak Institute, Singapore, and the Senior Fellow, Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs, Malaysia. Now, I will start asking three questions, preset questions to 3 panelists. So there will be 9 answers. So it will take about 45 to 50 minutes. And then after that, around 3 p.m. in Jakarta time, the floor will be open. So please don't hesitate to write your question in chat box. So as much as time allows, I will take up good questions and ask the 3 panelists. So let me start the first part of this discussion or panel discussion. So my first question is this. How do you assess the performance of Asian economies during the pandemic? Are Asian countries coordinating well with each other? what is the most important lesson learned from this experience for Asia? So, Mr. Tom Lembom, so your turn. So please start.
Okay, thank you, Sonobe-san. And I note that the organizers already unmuted me. Ambassador Imura-san, what happened to you earlier apparently happens to the best of us. One time, Amazon founder and CEO Jeff Bezos was doing congressional hearings via Zoom. And he also forgot to unmute himself. So the senators and congressmen had to say, Mr. Bezos, you know, you're still on mute. Can you unmute yourself? So happens to the best of us. Well, to go to your question, Sonobe-san, the first question of this sessions of this webinar's discussion, how's the Asian countries' performance been during the pandemic? I guess the thing I would highlight is that you know, all Asian countries, like all Asian economies and all Asian societies, are clearly suffering during the pandemic. We're just suffering in different ways and to different degrees, right? And what I want to point out is that I belong to the school of thought that believes that the world has an excessive focus on GDP numbers. Yeah, I think in the age of the soundbite and you know, social media, we've become so lazy and we just look at GDP numbers as a proxy for everything. Yeah, but I want to point out today that GDP numbers are averages. Yeah, and these kinds of numbers that are broad averages tend to camouflage, tend to hide significant disparities. Yeah. So to give you an example, right? If you have a situation where 10% of an economy is growing 50% year on year, while the remaining 90% of that economy is contracting by 10%, right? The two will average out to 4% aggregate growth. And it will seem quite okay, right? 4% sounds very healthy, but it's masking a situation where really a small percent of the economy, a small portion of the economy is growing tremendously, while the vast remainder of the economy is actually contracting significantly. Yeah. And so, for example, Indonesia is benefiting tremendously from the sharp increase in commodity prices over the past 1 year. And so sectors such as palm oil, you know, coal mining, even agricultural commodities are enjoying, you know, very robust growth. But the service sector accounts for 55% of our GDP, and clearly it's suffering from the numerous mobility restrictions and the numerous lockdowns, right? So I would caution that the seemingly resilient GDP numbers actually are hiding significant disparities where, you know, significant segments of the economy are suffering tremendously, while only certain sectors of these economies are thriving at the moment. And the longer these disparities continue, the greater will be the scar, right? The scarring suffered by these economies over the medium to long term. On the question of the most important lessons of the pandemic, right? I would highlight that I think, in a word, what's been absolutely critical and the major differentiator between the success and failure of different countries in managing the pandemic, I would encapsulate it in one word, and that's professionalism. Yeah. So we've seen varying degrees of professionalism among the different countries, and we've seen different degrees of professionalism between democratically elected governments and autocratic governments. So I don't think that we can say that autocratic governments have done a better job or that democratically elected governments have done a better job. I think it's all come down to professionalism. Yeah. So regardless of the political system, the more the government and political culture of a country is able to professionalize the pandemic response, like the better that country has fared. But the more that the government, irrespective of its structure, right, and the more the political culture of the country has tended to politicize the pandemic, the worse has been the performance of that country. Yeah. So again, I think we have a diverse spectrum of types of government, from the single-party rule or autocratic, regime to democratically elected. But in a situation like the pandemic, and I think this will probably apply to other scientifically intensive crises, like the climate crisis, like the more these issues can be professionalized, the more the management of these issues can be professionalized, the better the performance.
Okay, thank you very much for raising the important issues like increased inequality within the country and also between countries. And the disparity between countries may be closely related to professionalism, which may be related to the political culture. Yeah, so thank you very much. Now the same questions for Professor Kimura, please.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor for me to be here. I think Asia was performing relatively good under COVID-19. Certainly, COVID-19 was a really big challenge for everybody. But if you see the whole world, the economic performance is relatively good in Asia. When I say Asia, that includes Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia, actually. But certainly this is so-called a K-shaped recovery. Some sectors are having a really, really tough, say, in case of tourism or on-site services, and to some extent transportation, they had a really, really tough time, and still under tough time. But the tradable sector is relatively good, and then the more, certainly we had a big trade drop, both in goods and services, but the services were affected some more heavily, actually. So that's what we observe. But what I'd like to highlight on is the performance of global value chains or international production networks. Many were worrying about the future of global value chains at the beginning of the COVID-19 shocks. So that started from negative supply shocks. Initially in February 2020, imports from China were suddenly stopped, and we got a sort of a really big negative supply shocks. And then after that, we have positive demand shocks for masks and other personal protective equipment. We were going to be a sort of panic. But actually, those two shocks were gone relatively soon. Trade resumed very quickly in a month or two, actually. Then after that, we were worrying about big negative demand shocks coming from the worldwide recession. But the worldwide recession was not really coming because many countries are doing a very aggressive mitigation policies and unprecedented mitigation policies. So financial sector survived, and also the asset markets were not collapsing, actually. So the negative demand shocks were there, but relatively light. Then actually East Asia is having a positive demand shock on computers, dishwashers, and others. Those are coming from COVID-19. We are doing stay at home, or working at home. So we had a sort of special demand positively. So the East Asia were having a big plus effects because of that. So I think because of those, at the end, we observed that production networks, particularly in a really sophisticated version by machinery industries, were robust and also resilient. So some people like journalism at the beginning of the pandemic said the Economist wrote in May 2020 that the globalization will be ended now. But actually, we did not really observe that. So I think we really have to believe in the force of globalization and the virtue of East Asian economic development is, in my view, so the effective utilization of globalization. So still we have to believe in that and then make a sort of a good economic development from now on too. That's my first intervention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for again raising an important point of the kind of importance of the global division of labor and the tradable goods coming. So there are again the big disparity across sectors. Some sectors had the very terrible negative shocks, but some sectors had a special demand surge. So those economies with very diverse industrial structures were relatively stable, but some countries which are specialized in the kind of unfortunate sectors had that terribly suffer. So, but the global transaction is very important. That's an important lesson from this experience. Okay, now the same question to Dr. Giant, please.
Thank you, Dr. Sonobe. So I think I'll have to start by agreeing with my co-panelists who have, I think, very clearly explained the performance of Asian countries in sort of dealing with the pandemic individually. And I think the economic recovery in this region is on track. And I think Delta or Omicron or even the next variant will not really derail recovery. And that's mainly because I think our response to the pandemic or the virus, government response, has been moderating over time. So the initial full lockdowns that we saw at the first phase or the start of the pandemic are not likely to return. Right now, we're hearing about border closures with Omicron, but that I hope will be temporary and won't be pervasive. There have been a few countries that have reacted, quite drastically in this sense, but most of Asia has not done so. There have been some selective travel bans we have seen in many countries, but hopefully they also won't last. But overall, it's the domestic measures, mobility measures that really impact on the economy. And as Professor Kimura has pointed out, this has been, quite resilient because trade has played a big role. And today, trade volumes in developing Asia, or in total Asia, actually, including China, is already 20% higher than before the pandemic. So trade in goods has played a big role. Trade in services has to catch up, and hopefully Omicron won't delay this too much further. Let me finish by saying a bit about coordination, which was part of your question as well. I think here one has to be quite honest and say that coordination across Asian countries or even ASEAN countries has been relatively weak. In fact, at one level, it might even have been non-existent. We have seen each country operate independently in practice, although there's been a lot of talk about the importance of coordinating responses. The action has been quite different, unfortunately, and I think it's important to admit that so that we don't do it again. And by that, I mean we should try and coordinate at least our recovery process of opening up. If we can do that in going forward, then all is not lost. We haven't coordinated our response to the pandemic, but we can try and coordinate more our opening so that we don't have this piecemeal, haphazard reopening process throughout the region. But this has also been the case globally. It's not just Asia that's not been coordinated. This was a global pandemic that would have been best addressed by a global response. That has been missing. The G7, as you know, could not even come out with the communique because President Trump insisted on calling it the Wuhan virus. So there's been a failure at the global level, which you've also seen at the regional level, but hopefully we can turn that around with the recovery process. So let me stop there and turn it back to Dr. Sonobe.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jayant. So each country's government did an excellent job in the containment and then also the fiscal and also the financial stabilities and keep trade open. It was good. But in terms of the regional and the global cooperation, the coordination, the world could have done better, maybe. That's Dr. Jayant's assessment. Now, let's go to the next question. So next set of questions is about the medium-run projection for the next 10 years. So this coming decade is said to be crucial for climate change mitigation and adaptation, energy transition towards sustainability, the development of digital economy, and so on. So can Asia lead by example in addressing these agendas? So this is the second question. So again, let's start from the Minister Tom Lembong.
Thank you, Sonobe-san. I guess the way I would start to answer the question is, again, similar to the first question, by attempting to disaggregate what we often somewhat lazy, to lump everything together, like lumping everything into GDP average growth rates or into this concept of Asia. Obviously, Asia is tremendously diverse, right? And when it comes to issues such as climate change, pandemic preparedness, supply chains and production systems, at a minimum, there's several major blocks within Asia, right? One clearly is China, whose continued rise, I believe we will also discuss more in the course of today's session. Then there's Northeast Asia, Japan and Korea, right? There's Southeast Asia. There's South Asia, meaning India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. And then there's Australia, New Zealand, right? I guess it's fair to say that each block will lead or fail to lead to varying degrees, right? I think we're going to see a lot of leadership and are already seeing a lot of leadership from certain countries and certain blocks. And we're certainly seeing a failure of leadership from many other countries, around Asia. I think when you take it all together, it averages out to quite a positive overall leadership position. Yeah. So meaning Asia will contribute very significantly, very meaningfully to the major issues of the 21st century, such as climate change, public health, pandemic preparedness, inequality, ecology, and so on. But again, it's a picture of significant disparities. Yeah. Just to share one set of statistics that dramatically highlights this disparity. Just one country, namely China, currently produces 90% of the world's solar panels. Right? China is host to 80% of the world's manufacturing capacity for lithium-ion batteries. And China currently produces 70% of the world's wind turbines. Yeah. Now, manufacturing and production is only one aspect of the solution to the climate change, right? All of us have a corresponding obligation and requirement to invest and install renewable energy capacity. Yeah, so we can all lead in different ways as producer and alternatively as consumer of, for example, climate solutions. And there again, even on the consumer side, right? So clearly on the production side, countries like China, Korea, Japan are leading in the production of renewable energy technologies, renewable energy equipment. But the rest of us have a significant role to play in purchasing and installing these technologies, right? But again, you have major disparities, right? So I see significant leadership on the part of China, countries like Vietnam and even India, right? But I see many other countries lagging. And again, I think overall, Asia, even by dint of its sheer size, will have a major role to play. But again, I think there's quite a spectrum from those who are very front and center, and those of us who are lagging behind.
Thank you very much, Tom. So if the Asian leaders can have a very nice coordination and division of labor in the innovation power, then the Asia will be able to lead the world in the next 10 years at least. Okay, thank you very much. And now we are about in the real middle of this first session. So after this, we will have a Q&A. So all the participants, please, whenever important question comes to your mind, please write question in the chat box. Thank you very much. So now the same set of questions to Professor Kimura.
Thank you. In the coming 10 years, certainly we are having a number of challenges. So from the viewpoint of international division of labor, or other way to say that newly developed and developing countries can attract, let's say, some production activities continuously, I think we would have 4 challenges. Those are interrelated, but a little bit separate issues. One is still COVID-19. Still, it's not ended. We have to get out of that somehow. Second, geopolitics. This is not the forum of talking about politics, but we have to mention that to some extent. The third, digital technology. That would change fundamentally the way of doing in international production networks. The fourth is environmental concern. So the first one, so COVID-19, we still cannot move, persons cannot move freely, but business links survive somehow, but we cannot really continue this forever. So now communication technology can substitute the people's movement to some extent. That was a big experiment, but how we can resume that's a good production system continuously, and that's a challenge certainly. Still, we are having a sort of peaks of pandemics, infection, and also the new mutants are coming. so I think that's certainly a challenge. Second, geopolitics. The relationship between the US and China is going to be more and more complicated, and middle powers in between thinking of how to behave. certainly we have to have a good economic relationship with both, actually. We'd like to keep that definitely. But to some extent, we have to think of how to set a sort of boundary or scope of decoupling and others. We cannot avoid everything, actually. So that's certainly a challenge. And also the confrontation would decay the rule-based trading regime. That's a big loss too, actually. So we have to deal with that. Digital technology. Now I think we are using communications technology more than before. So that would make more dispersion forces. So say production activities can be dispersed to some extent. But at the same time, various kinds of information technologies are coming in, artificial intelligence, robotics, and others. We are not quite sure about the impact of those kinds of technology on the international division of labor. Say, particularly in the manufacturing sector, whether or not we can have this kind of a division of labor in the future or not, we really have to check that. And also, the way of doing in international transactions could be changing too. So we are observing so-called a third unbundling, a person-to-person, person-by-person division of labor. Now, an individual English teacher is teaching English from Cebu Islands to Tokyo, for example. I think that kind of transaction will be getting bigger, and then how can it be bigger, and what would be the implication for employment creation and others? I think certainly we have to check that. So many challenges are coming, fundamental challenges are coming from digital technology. The last one, environmental concern. One thing is that we are using a lot of fossil fuels. This region is still using a lot of coal, and even not coal, a lot of fossil fuels. And also the manufacturing basis development. So those are energy intensive. So how we can deal with the environmental concern from the world is really a big challenge. So we have to think of that too. So many challenges, but I think how we can keep a good international division of labor in coming a decade. I think that's certainly we really have to think about it very seriously. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kimura. Yeah, so there are four important areas: COVID-19, geopolitics, digital technology, and environmental concern. And many of these are, at least three of these are about kind of global issues that requires cross coordination among countries, but even digital technology. So not just innovation itself, but how to use the new technology is very important. How to share the benefits from it is important. So I think so next decade will be also the decade for the diplomats. So Ambassador Imura, so you will be busy again. Okay, thank you very much. And then the same questions to Dr. Jaya.
Thank you, Snave. So I think being the last speaker, most of the key points have been made. I think these mega trends that we're discussing, environment, digitalization, and so on, are going to be pressing issues as we go forward. So the challenge is made more difficult by the pandemic. So we are starting off on the back foot, if you like, because the impacts of this pandemic will linger for a long time. The real impacts, the increase in inequality that Pak Lembong mentioned, and the reversal of decades of progress on poverty in many countries are things that have been added on by the pandemic. And so we're starting off on the back foot, but we have so much work to be done anyway. So a lot of these trends were there even before the pandemic, but have been made worse by it. My biggest fear is that the anti-globalization sentiment that has found new fodder with the pandemic will limit our ability to deal with these challenges going forward. So the rise in the barriers on, say, capital and labor mobility that we have seen in the name of the pandemic and health safety may last a lot longer than they need to be around. So once we declare this pandemic over, it's going to be difficult to dismantle some of the restrictions that have been increased because of the pandemic. And that's because of the rise in anti-globalization sentiment. So to deal with these mega trends and mega challenges, we need to keep borders open. We need to keep factor mobility back to where it was before the pandemic, because the adjustment costs are going to be quite high for quite some time. So I hope that we can resist the temptation to look inward and keep globalization moving forward, because otherwise the costs will be a lot higher than they need to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Dr. Jan said, keep going on toward further globalization. So there will be interesting question relating to that point. So in the chat box, so in the Q&A session, I will ask that question to you. Okay, thank you. Then let's move on to the third question, which is a bit abstract. But because the title of today's forum is Asian Century, so let me ask this question. So many people in the world have already said that we are entering the Asian century. But how do you define Asian century? How do you respond to the expectation of many people in the world about Asian century? Okay, again, Tom, your turn, please.
Thank you, Sonobe-san. So first of all, I'd like to point out that this can be the Asian century for the right reasons. It can also be the Asian century for the wrong reasons. So there's good reasons and bad reasons, right? I think the good reasons that I continue to be very confident about is we will see rising prosperity, right? We will see dramatic progress in the implementation and widespread rollout of new technologies, right? In digitalizing our economies, in bringing the internet and connectivity and computing resources to virtually the whole of Asian society, right? So those are all the right and good reasons why this century will be the Pacific century or the Asian century. We also have some bad reasons or some wrong reasons why this would be the Asian century. And here I want to highlight what Ambassador Imura early in the session carefully touched on, which is the military balance. Yeah, I guess we're all somewhat familiar that over the last several weeks in particular, the escalating tensions between China and the USA have been very much in the headlines. Yeah, and I will not go into too much detail right now, unless in the Q&A we decide to do so. But it's fair to say that other than perhaps Ukraine, where Russian troops are currently accumulating in an alarming way, I guess Asia is also host to the major flashpoint, namely Taiwan, right? Which therefore has significant potential for hostilities, for armed conflict. And here I want to cite the former Treasury Secretary of the United States, Hank Paulson, who commented in the recent Bloomberg New Economy Forum in Singapore that great powers never desire to actually go to war, right? They stumble into it. Yeah. Another great phrase that I saw recently in some articles is that China and the USA are sleepwalking into a war, right? But unfortunately, we're potentially in a situation where, for the first time since the Cold War, we now can no longer take peace for granted. Yeah, I think it will require significant diplomatic efforts on the parts of all of us to de-escalate and to prevent a situation where the two great powers in the Pacific, China and USA, sleepwalk into an armed conflict. Yeah, but aside from that, I think for the aside from the good reasons and the bad reasons why Asia will be at the center of the century, I think I do want to amplify again what Professor Jayant mentioned just now, which is the rise of anti-globalization sentiment. Yeah, and I want to connect that to something that Professor Kimura-san mentioned earlier, which is that during the pandemic, the key sectors that have been performing very, very well are the tradable sectors. Yeah, so ironically, we're becoming more reliant on the tradable sectors at the same time as we have rising protectionism and rising anti-globalization, right? So I think if you ask me today, in my view, we're currently losing it, right? The Asian century is slipping from our fingers. But I'm confident that we will take it back. I'm betting that as the pandemic recedes, reopening and restoration of trade arrangements, of efforts to smoothen trade and to facilitate trade will resume, and it will restore us to the Asian century.
Okay, thank you very much. So although the world facing the kind of problem of escalating tension between the big economies, but Asia is likely to have Asian century in terms of prosperity. But as Tom already emphasized, there are kind of problem of increasing inequality. So these days, so prosperity means not only the economic prosperity, but we also have to pay attention to the social and environmental prosperity. And any movement which seems to be good, like globalization, any progress in globalization can cause both kind of winners and create both winners and losers. So that's why there are always problem like as we go further to globalization and then more dependent on the international trade, then there are increasing kind of sentiment of anti-globalization. So it's always difficult for politicians. Okay, so the same question to Professor Kimura.
Thank you very much. I think I share views from Park Tom and also Jayan a lot. In the past 3 decades or so, East Asia, including Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia, were having a tremendous economic growth. At the same time, a very quick eradication of poverty too. So I think that was really as a great aspects of East Asia. Particularly from the viewpoint of outsiders. So we have to continue working on that. Maybe 3 things are needed, overlapped with things that are suggested by other panelists. The first one is the effective utilization of globalization forces. So that includes technology. I think we have to really fight against the anti-globalization sentiment. We really have to look at the sort of a good feature of globalization. At the same time, certainly we have to have some backup. So from the viewpoint of inclusiveness and sustainability. Maybe the market forces cannot take care of everything for those. So certainly we have to need some backup, but that's very important. Second is that we really have to utilize a private dynamism. So, our economic growth is really led by private people, private sector, rather than the government. So I think in order to have a good private dynamism, we have to maintain peace, both domestic and international, and also the rule-based trading regime and stability of macroeconomic policy. I think those are certainly important. The third is we have to enhance, develop regional cooperation more, particularly the coalition of middle powers between superpowers. I think the superpowers can have some discretionary policies sometimes because they are not afraid of retaliation, actually. But the middle powers need rule-based trading regime, stable economic environment. So I think we have to develop regional cooperation more, and that would connect to the global governance too. Those are my interventions. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I was muted. Sorry. So thank you very much, Professor Kimura. Same question to Dr. Jayan.
Right, thank you. So in order to say something different from my co-panelists, because they've made all the right points already, let me take you back a little bit into history then. And I think this is quite telling, because if you go back in history, you find that this is not the emergence of Asia we are witnessing now, but the re-emergence. So in 1820, Asia was already constituting 60% of the world economy. In fact, China and India alone were more than half the world economy. And then, of course, the Industrial Revolution came in and changed things for the next 2 centuries. In fact, at its lowest point, Asia was only about 15% of world output. And the resurgence or revival of Asia started with Japan and the newly industrializing economies. I think actually this year or next year marks the 50th anniversary of Japan joining the OECD, advanced country grouping. So we've seen tremendous ups and downs. So this is Asia returning to where it was. And currently it's more than 1/3 of the world. And the question is, will this trend continue? And I think my co-panelists have identified all the key factors. I guess if you want to use a summary statistic, basically Asia has to grow with productivity. And that's what's required. Having grown a lot through factor accumulation in the past, in the catch-up, future growth will significantly depend on productivity catch-up. And when I was at ADB, before coming to ICS recently, I managed a study on the Asian century that was done with the Centennial Group. And there we looked at projections using the Growth Commission model up to 2050. And we found that this, Asia could be about 60% of the world again by 2050 if productivity catch-up continued and addressed a lot of these mega trends that we already spoke about, including the demographic trends in the region. So that's certainly possible, but as Dino said, it's not preordained. It has to be earned, and even more so now that we're coming out of this horrible pandemic. But I think, as Pak Lembong said, I think Asia can do it. It can come back to the growth trajectory path, and that will be driven by productivity, and productivity requires openness. And we come back to this globalization theme, which I want to emphasize. So let me stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So the Asian century will be dependent on high productivity, and the high productivity will come from openness. That's great, great phrase. Yeah, worth memorizing. Thank you very much. So we are exactly on time, and the floor is open. That means I will pick up some questions from chat box to ask the panelists. So thank you, Tom, for already answering some questions from Jeffrey. We are very quick. So then there is a question about the industry 4.0. So, okay, this question will be to both maybe Tom and Professor Kimura. In which areas should Indonesia profile itself during the 4.0 digital era to become the #1 nation together with the ASEAN countries? If you can compare it with the Japanese Industrial Revolution after the Second World War, can you please address this question? Maybe starting from Tom, please.
Thank you. The post-pandemic era is not going to be quite like the post-World War II era, yeah, where essentially Japan reindustrialized and eventually came to dominate sectors such as shipbuilding, then electronic appliances, automotive, and so on. If you think about it, a lot of the strongest growth engine in the world economy and particularly in the increasingly advanced economies are actually in intangibles. Yeah. So I know that manufacturing is incredibly important, right? And that technology and hardware is incredibly important. But ultimately, if you look at the structure of economies, the more advanced an economy becomes, the higher the percentage of service sector in that economy. Yeah, and it's really quite striking. I mean, again, you know, I know that all the focus is on things like automotive and electronics and so on, and those are really important. But I'll give you the example of the video entertainment, video streaming revolution. Yeah, and maybe it is timely because we have a Netflix show like Squid Game taking over the world. Yeah, but what was previously quite a limited industry, namely Hollywood, plus maybe Bollywood, yeah, has now become a $250 billion per year industry. That is the amount of money that Netflix, Disney, Warner Brothers, NBC Universal, you know, Amazon Prime Video, Apple TV, and so on are spending on content creation. Yeah. Now, Indonesia will do its utmost to attract manufacturing investment, and we have. Hyundai, Kia Motors, for example, selected Indonesia as its manufacturing hub for ASEAN, right? And Japanese automotive companies such as Toyota, Honda, Nissan, and the like have very significant manufacturing capacity in Indonesia. But for me, Indonesians stand out for our creativity, humor, imagination, charm, charisma, and so I would not overlook all the intangible industries or the service industries, such as, you know, content creation, you know, film entertainment, movie production, music. Eventually, tourism will return, right? Eventually, we will overcome this pandemic, and tourism will return. So I want to highlight services sector and the production and trade in so-called intangibles, in non-hardware products.
I see. Thank you very much. Yeah, certainly. The half century ago, the service sector was completely non-tradable sector. So the demand for services could increase only when the country become richer and the demand for service increase. So that's why Japan have to rely on the development of manufacturing sector to get money from outside country. But now service sector is becoming also tradable sector, and then can export the services. And then, so there are more opportunities for leverage the creativity of people. So yes, Indonesia can be #1 if they really leverage their creativity. And then Kimura Sensei, do you have anything to add about this question?
Yeah, whether or not we still need manufacturing sector or not, I think that's a big question. What will be the future of manufacturing sector with digital technology? Say many digital related services are not in manufacturing right now. So they are doing disruptive tech innovation, jump into a sort of new businesses, and manufacturing is not a very important part of that. But if we have some sort of a good merger, good collaboration between manufacturing sector with a really incremental innovation and digital industries with disruptive innovation, we have to think of some sort of overlapped areas over there. So if you see Shenzhen in China, for example, they are doing a lot of digital businesses, but at the same time, they are doing various kinds of manufacturing activities, very versatile. They can make really small lot, large varieties type manufacturing over there. So that's why we have sort of drone and others, for example. So I think that could be one possibility of a sort of collaboration between all the industries and digital technology. So in that line, I think Indonesia is really having a pretty good industrial base. The size is big, actually. So even if a trade pattern is not really like Malaysia or Thailand, but a lot of manufacturing activities are already in Indonesia. So I think the missing in Indonesia could be, one is really task by task division of labor. So machinery parts, trade and others are still pretty small. I think if you have better connectivity, then you can attract more production activities. Second is electronics is missing, but you can have electronics industry too, actually. That could be sort of a relatively short distance to digital technology. The third one is the forming industrial agglomeration. I think in the past 10 years, the development of hard infrastructure is tremendous in Indonesia. So we really have to have efficient industrial agglomeration. The local firms can come into production networks, having more technology transfer over there. So I think still Indonesia has a lot of potential in utilizing manufacturing for the next generation. So that's what I'm thinking.
I see. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to read this question, maybe to Dr. Jayan. This question is from Lampadito. I'd like to raise questions for all the panelists, but I would like to ask this Dr. Jayan. So is it possible for Asian countries to integrate and form a regional organization like the European Union?
Well, I think whether or not it's possible is a difficult question. Well, let me put it this way. I don't think they should try, and if they do form a grouping, it shouldn't be like the European Union. Asia has its own model of regionalism, which I think has worked very well. And the European experience is one that works for them, but doesn't necessarily have to be emulated in Asia. Let me explain why using ASEAN as an example, right? So I think ASEAN has key features that are diametrically different from the European model, right? ASEAN is institution light, it's outward looking, and also it's market driven, right? We don't have a Brussels type institute, massive bureaucratic mechanism. We have a small secretariat in Jakarta, and that works for its membership because the appetite to surrender sovereignty to a supranational body is still quite low. So I think there's good things we can learn from the European experience, but we don't need to replicate it here. Asia has already got a number of loosely bound agreements, and we have an important one that will start from 1st of January, which is RCEP, and RCEP will also have a secretariat. And I think it will focus on the economic agenda, which is what Asia prefers to do. The non-economic agenda, I think, is still quite far away, and that's probably not yet the appetite for it in Asia. So we can have a broader agreement. I think one that also brings in the US and China to try and resolve this dispute would be great. And APEC is the one agreement that brings them both together. But however we do it, we don't need to follow the European model. And I think there are special Asian approaches that have worked for our appetite right now. And that's the way we should go.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I'd like to read this question from Dr. Christian Proberger, JCBIS Bangkok. So he seems to consider that India may be an interesting economic partner for Indonesia. So from this point of view, he asks, to what extent the Gulf of Bengal concept is a relevant focus for economic cooperation? Tom, can you handle this question?
Absolutely, since it also touches on Indonesia. So I happen to be one of the people who believes extremely strongly in the prospects for India-Indonesia collaboration. Yeah, and I'll get to that in a moment. But I also believe in what Dr. Dino Jalal has heard me say many times before, which is that we're about to go into a period of what the Lowy Institute in Sydney calls the middle power moment. Yeah. So yes, all the media attention is on the superpowers, China and the USA. But whilst those two superpowers are attempting to resolve their differences, many of the middle powers, such as Japan, Korea, Indonesia, India, and many other ASEAN countries and other countries around the world, need to collaborate, need to work together to continue progressing our collective interests. Yeah. So in that context alone, I think India and Indonesia will be very important. I believe that by default, India will be kind of a leader in South Asia, right? Whereas Indonesia will be kind of a leader in Southeast Asia. And so a strong India-Indonesia partnership could bring together South Asia and Southeast Asia, which I think would generate significant synergies. Yeah. Now, the other thing that needs to be highlighted in this FPCI GRIPS forum is the increasing sense around the world among think tanks and policy institutes that multilateralism is declining very sharply. So organizations like the WTO, right, and frankly, even WHO is struggling, right? Many countries are going their own ways, and what appears to be trending now is what more and more people are referring to as minilateralism. So agreements between 3 countries, agreements between 4 countries. So it's spontaneous groupings between a handful of countries on issues of common interest or areas where together they can progress certain issues. For example, agree certain common standards, or agree to collaborate. I remember after the 2008 global financial crisis, Japan, Korea, and China got together. And the 3 finance ministers of Japan, Korea, and China made a joint announcement that they will collaborate on currency matters, on monetary policy, right? And so I think bilateral, trilateral, and quadrilateral arrangements, for example, India, Indonesia, or say India, Indonesia, and Japan, right? Say Japan, India, Indonesia. To give you an example, India is a huge producer of pharmaceuticals, particularly generics, and now we've discovered also of vaccines, right? Japan is on the leading edge. It's making significant progress in pharmaceuticals and biotech, right? And Indonesia contributes a sizable market to their potential collaboration, right? So, for example, Japan, India, Indonesia collaborating on pharmaceuticals and vaccines and healthcare, right? That would seem to me to be an example of a very promising collaboration. Actually, when I persuaded Hyundai Motors to choose Indonesia as its production hub, I promised them that I would eliminate import duties on automotive imports from India. Why? Because I realized that Hyundai and Kia had just completed massive factories, factory investments in India. Yeah. So I promised them that they could synergize their factories in India with their future factories in Indonesia by having smooth and open trade in automotive components and even in whole motor vehicles between India and Indonesia. And that was ultimately what persuaded Hyundai to choose Indonesia, right? So again, as an example of a trilateral collaboration between Korea, India, and Indonesia. And it happens to be that we have a big headache with India, which is we have a large and growing trade surplus with India. And it's making the Indian government angrier and angrier because we're exporting more and more palm oil and coal to India. So we have to import something back. We have to import something from India. We have to import more from India to balance the trade. So I think hopefully we will start soon with automotive imports from Hyundai and Kia factories in India. But again, I think the potential, for example, for pharmaceuticals and vaccines between India and Indonesia would be enormous. And for that matter, between India and ASEAN.
Thank you very much. So, Dr. Jayan, with India-Indonesia partnership, how will it look like from to the countries like Malaysia and Indonesia?
I think this is very interesting what Pak Lema was saying about minilateralism, and I think that's true. That's what's happening more and more, and countries like Malaysia and other middle income countries are looking to also link up in this way. But I think all that is fine as long as we all move towards an eventual multilateral arrangement of these many minilateral accords. So we don't want a new noodle bowl of minilateral agreements developing on top of the FTAs that we have seen. And I think the reason, the way to avoid that is to deal with the fundamental problems facing multilateral institutions. We are supposed to have a ministerial conference of the WTO starting tomorrow, but that's been postponed now for the second time because of Omicron. That's the first casualty of Omicron so far. But had it happened, or when it happens, we will still find that there's a lot of friction between the old, north-south divide coming out to play again. And that's because these type of institutions don't reflect the geopolitical realities of the current world. And this is why you've got like India and South Africa breaking away on certain important agreements from the other developed countries. The waiver that they want for trips on vaccines is one example, again, where the European Union is suggesting all other ways of dealing with it except providing this waiver for vaccines at a time when we need it so badly. So we need to really fix this gridlock and this cause of gridlock, which is this, not recognizing the true geopolitics. So the leadership group of the old days has changed, and no one has told the existing leaders, or they don't want to know about it. And that kind of power imbalance, I think, needs to be rectified so that the minilateral agreements can build up towards a multilateral outcome rather than just continue to proliferate. And I think Malaysia and other countries would also benefit from that eventual movement towards multilateral deals.
Okay, thank you very much for a great answer. So I think this will be the last question that I can take up. This is from someone, Mohammad Ayub Mirdad from Afghanistan. So he asks, when we are talking about Asia, it is certainly not only a few developed countries, but also other countries where they are suffering of war, economy, and humanitarian crisis, such as Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, and so on. What these powerful Asian countries can do to solve the problem in the mentioned countries. Because we are talking about the Asian century, yeah, we have to be able to address this kind of question. So starting from Kimura Sensei, because we have only a few minutes, so very quickly, please.
Yeah, I think economy cannot solve political problems directly. So certainly for humanitarian support and other things, so other countries can do many things. But political stability should be resumed by politics somehow. So I cannot really have a sort of very good answer, at least from the viewpoint of economic policies.
Thank you very much. Tom, your turn.
Yes, thank you, Sonobe-san. My view is that as Asia resumes its rise, shall we say, right? Because I mentioned earlier, at the moment, in my view, we're not rising. We sort of lost it or are losing it. But I'm confident we will regain momentum and then we'll get back, our strengths. But as Asia resumes its rise, I believe we have to play a bigger role in regions around the world, including places like Afghanistan. Yeah. Again, with greater prosperity just comes greater responsibility. And we've already touched on the importance of globalization. Yeah, but globalization means globalization of opportunities and prosperity, but it also means globalization of problems. Yeah. So problems that arise in individual countries or individual regions will inevitably go global. Yeah. So again, you know, the terror attacks in the USA, the famous 9/11, right, came from overseas. It was a result of radicalization in the Middle East. So problems that are local in an era of globalization normally don't stay local, right? And look, by complete accident, somewhat randomly, the COVID virus seems to have arisen from Wuhan area, from China. But it could have arisen anywhere. It could have come out of Indonesia. It could have come out of, Eastern Europe, or even Western Europe, or out of Latin America. We don't know where the next virus will come from, and that's why in the chat among us prior to the session, I mentioned the world needs to convey tremendous gratitude to the government of South Africa right now for their transparency, for the speed of their announcement, for their cooperativeness to send samples of this new variant so that its genetic makeup can be decoded, and so that other countries can respond quickly to the emergence of the variant in South Africa. Yeah. So I can promise you that problems that arise in places like Afghanistan or Myanmar will not stay local for long. They will go regional, and eventually they will go global, right? And I think as Asia obtains greater resources, right, as we benefit from rising prosperity, and as our influence increases, as our resources increase, I think we have a responsibility to assist where we can. Yeah, starting with humanitarian aid, but also with things like scholarships, exchanges, opening ourselves to students, academics, tourists, to trade, trying to provide a market for exports from the poor countries, and to mutual learning, sharing technology, sharing lessons and learnings. So I think that will become a bigger issue for us. Maybe not this decade, but I predict with continuing economic growth and a rising footprint in the world, I believe in the 2030s we will have to become more involved in regions beyond Asia.
Thank you very much, Tom. And sorry, Dr. Jant, no time to ask you this question, but I think that we have had really fruitful discussions. So I'd like to thank all the participants, especially those who asked these stimulating questions. Thank you very much. And of course, thank you very much to the panelists. I think that all the participants will join me, thanking great panelists. Thank you very much. Now back to Stephanie.
Thank you, Dr. Sonobe, and thank you to all our wonderful panelists for your very insightful analysis and message. Please give a round of applause or virtual reactions for our moderator and speakers for the fruitful panel discussion. Once again, we would like to extend our gratitude to GRIPS for co-organizing this forum. We also would like to thank all participants who have joined us and for your active participation today. The organizing committee will provide e-certificates to all participants and you will receive it in your email after the event. We have now come to the end of today's forum. Don't forget to follow or subscribe to FBCI social media handles for more information about our activities, upcoming events, and programs. Thank you so much for tuning in. Goodbye and see you at FBCI's other future events. Stay safe and healthy, everyone.